back to my channel, or welcome if it's your first time here. I'm Lindsay, and today I'm doing a little review of Murtagh. It is not entirely spoiler-free, my review, but it isn't very detailed either. I kind of give an overall synopsis and talk about the themes and what's going on in the book, but I'm not going to give details. So just thought I'd give you that little warning. At first, I was hesitant to pick up this book because I felt like we didn't need more books in that eragon world. And hear me out. I love dragons. I love the inheritance cycle, but I just kind of felt like it concluded well and there didn't need to be these spin-off books that seem to be coming from it. I know right now we just have Murtagh, but it does seem like we are probably going to get more. However, the reason why I read Murtagh is because he is such an interesting character and I was very excited to hear things from his point of view. I am glad that I ended up reading it because I do really enjoy Murtagh as a character, and that's what intrigued me, and that's the reason why I picked up this book, is because of his complexities, his whole backstory, and his character arc. It's one of the more interesting ones in the stories, so that is something that pulled me to this book and something that I did continue to enjoy. It was also interesting to dive into this world post-Galbatorix's demise, where Murtagh is an outcast in society. He's ostracized by society because he is the son of a traitor and he was forced to be a traitor. And even though he ended up being good in the end, you know, he had his Darth Vader moment where he like helped them get rid of the big bad. And he doesn't blame people for treating him that way because of everything he did, and no one knows that he ended up being good in the end and was kind of good the whole time, but I digress. No one knows except Eragon and Nosferatu, so that's kind of the only people that he blames because they didn't really tell anybody. But even then, he doesn't seem to hold too harsh of feelings towards them. If you've read the Inheritance Cycle, I'm sure you know why. But that being said, he still just kind of has no safe place other than with his dragon Thorn, and I love Thorn, but it's so beautifully tragic because not even halfway through the stories there's lots of hints about him, you know, saying he's fine with just his dragon, but he's craving human connection. And it's not even just his mention of kind of missing his old friends and wanting a little bit more than a friendship with Nosferatu, but it's just there's little things like Thorn can't help him with certain things, and then there's parts where he is kind of he's undercover like in a community, and even though he knew he didn't belong there, it kind of felt like he belonged because he's missing that human connection, and that's just so incredibly beautifully sad to me. And that's something that's big in this book, other than just Murtagh needing his human connection in his community. There is a big stress on the importance of community, which is a cute overall message. And if you know Murtagh's story, there is a theme throughout this for him where he is so obsessed with not letting anyone get control over him again. He's so traumatized. He doesn't like to use his mind magic as much because if he opens it up, then there's chance to be attacked and all that kind of stuff. So I did appreciate diving into his trauma because I feel like there are other stories, some really old stories that where they'll traumatize a character and then not touch on it again, and then it's like he's fine. But Murtagh very clearly is going through it, and it's something that is acknowledged and very much delved in, they dive into. But what's interesting about his trauma is, and the fact that he's so ostracized by this society, is that he could then again hold harsh feelings towards everyone and be, you know, fall back into that evil persona that it was never truly his. But despite the society turning his back on him, he hasn't turned his back on them, and he's helping a lot of children throughout the book, which is very sweet and also very heartbreaking knowing his story. And I don't care if the kind of characterization is done where someone is kind of treated like a villain but still acts like a hero. I love the, like, no matter how harsh the world is to them, they still do good. I don't care how much it's overdone. I love it so much, and I'm always going to be a fan of that. And something else with going more into his trauma and not brushing over that, it lets you really connect to Murtagh more and his desire to really only do physical attacks over mental attacks and that kind of stuff. So, because he's so scared of being controlled again. And that's something that I really like, is being able to connect to the character that way, whether it's in like subtext you're telling us about it, or you're just straight up, you know, like this reminded him of back then, whatever. Personally, I prefer a little bit more subtext, but that's just me. I will say something else that I really appreciated when it comes to connecting with Murtagh is that because he was controlled by Galbatorix throughout the inheritance cycle, and he didn't have like the childhood that other people in the books had, and the mentorship that other people had, he is still really kind of learning his magic on his own, but the reader gets to learn it with him. It's not just he is reading about it or he is figuring things out as he's doing it. You're kind of figuring it out with him, and I really like when a book does that. It really, I think, connects you with the characters even more. I think it's also a good way to pace the book out. I'm not going to act like the pacing in this book is perfect. There are definitely some parts that drag, but when you are learning the magic with them instead of just info dumping the magic, it connects you more with the story, and it's better pacing, in my opinion. He does walk you through his memories of certain events in the original series, and I can understand how that can be annoying. As someone who hasn't read the original series in a hot minute, I didn't mind it as much, and it's also interesting because that series is from Eragon's point of view, which is a lot different than Murtagh's point of view, so that's another reason why I didn't mind it that much, but again, I completely understand how that could be annoying. Then there's Thorn, who has his own trauma, which makes me so sad. I love Thorn. His attitude is so funny, but just when you get into the fact that this dragon was also controlled and also traumatized, heartbreaking. That's another thing, a little bit warning, is that there was, you know, dragon abuse. And because he and Murtagh were kind of traumatized together, the bond that they've created is different than Eragon and Saphira's, and just watching them work through their issues together, well, reading about them working through their issues together, it's so sad, but so beautiful. And even though Murtagh craves that human connection, I love his loyalty to his dragon. I love the connection between the dragon riders in this series. Also, as I said, since he's so desperate to not be under someone's control again, you know that that's going to happen eventually. It was still very sad when it happened, but it wasn't like a twist. I didn't care because, again, Murtagh is this... You hope for it not to happen, of course, but you know it's gonna. And made me sad. Another thing, if I remember the inheritance cycle correctly, I do think this book had a more mature voice. I mean, Murtagh is older than Eragon, which is good. It had a different voice. And Christopher Paolini is also older, so that makes a lot of sense. And probably my biggest criticism is there is a kind of side quest in the beginning that I think dragged a bit. I do understand it kind of set us in Murtagh's mind and kind of got us understanding where he was coming from with a lot of things. However, it didn't really need to be 300 pages long, just in my opinion. It wasn't like a slow burn. I think there's a difference between slow burn and dragging, and to me, this dragged more than slow burn, because I love a slow burn, but this was just kind of like, okay, what are we doing here some of the time? That was just how I felt. That all being said, I did still like this book. The Inheritance Cycle was kind of the first book that I read about dragons and dragon riders, so it's gonna always kind of have a special place for me because I love dragons, and it really solidified my love for dragons in fantasy, so that's where I'm coming from with this. I also may like it because it's clearly, if you've read it, you know, and it's been talked about for a long time, that it's heavily influenced by Star Wars, and clearly I like Star Wars, if you haven't seen my lightsaber tattoo. So that could be my little bias, that I you know, see the Star Wars influence in it, but because Star Wars is very special to me, I might have just been like, well, it's Star Wars but with dragons, so... And as I've already said, Murtagh has one of the most heartbreaking backstories in this series, and if not an inspirational, then at least commendable arc, so I did really enjoy getting to have a book that was just his own, his point of view, and learning more about him. And I completely understand if people didn't want to read it because, as I said in the beginning, there was a good, solid ending, in my opinion, to the Inheritance Cycle series. So having this spin-off all these years later, I could see how that's not appealing. Also, there does continue to be a Star Wars kind of aspect to it, to where there's a, oh, but there was a bigger evil. You thought you killed the big bad, there was a bigger bad. So I completely understand not wanting to read this, and me personally, I kind of wasn't the biggest fan, and I'm usually not the biggest fan of you think you ended it, you wrote this whole series and you think it's over, but there was a bigger bad. Like, somehow Palpatine returned. It's not that, but gives me the same kind of vibes. And to add on to that, if more books come out, which I believe there will be from how this story ended and just from what I've heard people say, I don't think I'm going to read them. Again, it's not because I dislike this book. I'm just kind of at the point where I'm like, okay, I like that series and I liked getting to hear Murtagh and I really wanted to hear from Murtagh, but now I'm just kind of past it and done with it, and I still, you know, hold it in my heart, but I am moving on. So sorry. But that's really all I have to say. Thorn doesn't have anything to say, so that's this video. If you liked it, please like and subscribe. I talk about all different kind of books, but mainly fantasy and fantasy romance, and clearly I love dragons, so if you love dragons, subscribe. Okay, bye!